Hey guys, this is the Revolutionary Male. My name is Alex, and today I'm going to go ahead and cover an article from The Atlantic entitled, "Colleges Have a Guy Problem." A recent viral news story reported that a generation of young men is abandoning college. The pattern has deep roots. By Derek Thompson, published on September 14th, 2021. So it's actually a relatively recent article. Let's go ahead and get into this. American colleges and universities now enroll roughly 6 women for every 4 men. This is the largest female-to-male gender gap in the history of higher education, and it's getting wider. Last year, U.S. colleges enrolled 1.5 million fewer students than 5 years ago. The Wall Street Journal recently reported men accounted for more than 70% of the decline. The statistics are stunning, but education experts and historians aren't remotely surprised. Women in the United States have earned more bachelor's degrees than men every year since the mid-1980s. Every year, in other words, that I've been alive. This particular gender gap hasn't been breaking news for about 40 years, but the imbalance reveals a genuine shift in how men participate in education, the economy, and society. The world has changed dramatically, but the ideology of masculinity isn't changing fast enough to keep up. Give me a break. That last line is a bunch of nonsense. But let's keep in mind, this has been true for the last 40 years, and yet we still live in a society where we hear all this stuff about patriarchy and women's inequality and the gender pay gap and this and that and this and that when it comes to inequality or oppression of women. Let's keep things in perspective here, okay? Women are not oppressed in the Western world anymore, if they ever were, to the degree that a lot of people would like us to believe. Continuing, for decades, American women have been told that the path to independence and empowerment flows through school. Although they are still playing catch-up in the labor force, I'm not sure what that means exactly, catch-up in the labor force, and leadership positions such as chief executive and senator are still dominated by men, women have barnstormed into colleges. That is the very definition of progress. In poorer countries, where women are broadly subjugated or otherwise lack access to regular schooling, girls enjoy no educational advantage whatsoever. Yeah, exactly. This is the West, where women have equality. They've achieved equality. And in fact, there are lots of ways now that women are advantaged over men, such as this. Still, gender inequality on something as important as education presents problems, no matter what direction the inequality points to. While men are more likely to go to college than they were 10 years ago, something seems to be restraining the growth of male enrollment. In 1970, men accounted for 57% of college and university students. 2 years later, Congress passed Title IX regulations that prohibited sex-based discrimination in any school that received federal funding. The fact that the gender gap is even larger today in the opposite direction than it was when Congress determined that we needed a new law to promote equal education seems like something we should pay attention to, says Richard Reeves, a Brookings Institution senior fellow who is writing a book about men and boys in the economy. I'm struck by the fact that nobody seems to understand why this is happening. There's lots of reasons why this is happening, and there are lots of people who understand why this is happening. Society has told men for the last 40 to 50 years that they don't need us. We are not needed, we are not valued, we are not important, nobody cares about us. That's been the message for 40 years here. Nobody wants us around, nobody needs us around, it'd be better off if we just disappeared. That's been the message. For my lifetime, that's been the message. So it doesn't surprise me whatsoever that men are going, okay, fine, we will leave you alone, and dropping off. Because as men, one of our primary driving forces is to, do what the society, and especially the women in the society, would like us to do. We are biologically programmed to do that. And so we've responded in kind to that request. The U.S. Education gender gap isn't just a college phenomenon. Long before female students outnumber men on university campuses, they outperform boys in high school. Girls in elementary school spend more time studying than boys, are less likely to misbehave than boys, and get better grades than boys across all major subjects. Let's not forget about the studies which show that if a teacher in school is given a test that is done by a test to grade anonymously, they will grade in the work between. Let's start this again. Let's not forget about the study, the research, where a teacher was given 2 tests with identical work on it. When she graded the tests anonymously, she didn't know who the students were. She graded them equally. But when the teacher knew that one student was a boy and one student was a girl, she gave the girl higher grades. This is the kind of stuff boys are facing in education now. Okay? Not just the fact that teachers are biased against us, but biased against them, but also because of the decline of recess and the fact that the different ways that boys, generally speaking, tend to behave as opposed to girls, and the different ways that boys tend to learn as opposed to girls, have been demonized and determined to be defective and have been completely eroded from the education system. Boys tend to be more rambunctious, more physically active, and need a lot more recess time in order to actually get their brain to learn, because they learn more practically. Girls are more, generally speaking, capable of sitting and reading and learning the way that the modern school system is designed education to be. So it benefits them significantly, and it disadvantages boys. But let's continue. For decades, guys have been less likely to graduate from high school, less likely to enroll in college immediately, and less likely to finish college and earn a diploma. Reeves told me, "There is a linear educational trajectory for girls and women. Boys and men tend to zigzag their way through adolescence." Sociologists and cultural critics have taken many dubious stabs at why the gender gap in education is growing. Some have blamed the feminist dogma of the education system and the inherently distracting presence of girls in classrooms. I don't put much stock in those explanations. I don't put much stock in the explanation that there are too many girls in the classrooms either. That's a bunch of baloney. Everything that I just mentioned is a reason why boys are not, following through on education to the degree that they once did. There's no purpose for it, and there's no purpose for it for most of us anymore, for so many of us anymore. We don't get anything out of it the way that we used to. It isn't incentivized to us the way that it is for girls. We don't see the benefits the way that women do. And nobody's out there. There hasn't been a 40-year-long campaign telling boys the way to be better men is to go to school. We've been being told, like I said, we have been told that we're what's wrong with the world. We need to take a step back. We need to leave everything alone. We broke shit. And now we got to step back and let the women fix it. That's what we've been told. Let's continue. The story I prefer begins with the economy. For much of the 20th century, men without any college education could expect to earn a middle-class salary in fields such as manufacturing and mining. In the 1970s, the share of the labor force working in these brawny industries declined. But men, especially in poor areas where college attainment is low and may even be falling, have struggled to adapt to a 21st century economy where a high school diploma alone is often insufficient to earn a middle-class wage. Yes, this is also the case. As the modern economy has moved from a labor, a brute strength-based manual labor economy to a mental strength-based mind economy, it has definitely advantaged girls over boys because of the simple fact that, generally speaking, they have that biological difference between girls and boys in the way that we learn and how complementary our skills are. Women tend to be more capable of sitting in an office every day and interacting with people and doing the kind of customer service related work that the modern economy, has available. A lot of men aren't built that way. They're built to do more physical labor. It's part of our biology. Continuing now. The sociologist Catherine Eden has written that men without college degrees in deindustrialized America have been adrift for decades. They face the simultaneous shocks of lost jobs, disintegrating nuclear families, and rising deaths of despair in their communities. As 20th century institutions have crumbled around them, these men have withdrawn from organized religion. Their marriage rates have fallen in lockstep with their church attendance. Far from the ordered progression of the mid-century American archetype, marriage, career, house, and yard, men without college degrees are more likely to live what Eden and other researchers call haphazard lives, detached from family, faith, and work. Yes, that is very, very true, and it's very distressing. It's not good for the broad spectrum of men to lead lives quite so detached from their communities. But that's what happens when you give. That's one of the unintended consequences of giving women so much power in society. They have the power to leave their families, to disintegrate their families. They're going to do that. I mean, it's inevitable. These things are all connected to each other. I mean, how often do you hear women now, I think it's 40% of all children in the United States are now born out of wedlock. Women would rather, at this point in time, raise children by themselves than raise children with a man. And that's a disturbing fact. The male haphazardness might be reproducing itself among younger generations of men who lack stable role models to point the way to college. Single-parent households have grown significantly more common in the past half-century, and 80% of those are headed by mothers. This is in part because men are more likely to be incarcerated. More than 90% of federal inmates, for example, are men. Men are also less likely to be fixtures of boys' elementary school experience. About 75% of public school teachers are female. Suggesting that women can't teach boys would be absurd, but the absence of male teachers might be part of a broader absence of men in low-income areas who can model the path to college for boys who are looking for direction. Exactly. And let's not forget, who's picking these men to have babies with? The women, right? These men who aren't around, either for good reasons or bad reasons, whether they're in prison or because the mother is crazy and doesn't want them around. I mean, there's two extremes for you right there. The women are picking these men to reproduce with. What does that tell you? There's something fundamentally broken here. The argument might sound pretty touchy-feely, but some empirical research backs it. A 2018 study of social mobility and race led by the Harvard economist Raj Shetty found that income inequality between black and white Americans was disproportionately driven by bad outcomes for black boys. The few neighborhoods where black and white boys grew up to have similar adult outcomes were low poverty areas that also had high levels of father presence. That is, even boys without a father at home saw significantly more upward mobility when their neighborhood had a large number of fathers present. High poverty areas without fathers present seem to be doubly impoverished, and boys who live in these neighborhoods are less likely to achieve the milestones, such as college attendance, that lead to a middle-class salary or better. Yes, because single moms can't raise good men. I'm sorry. Generally speaking, this is obviously not true in all cases, but generally speaking, single mothers do not raise good men. If they were capable of picking a good man, they wouldn't be single mothers. If they knew what a good man was, they wouldn't be a single mother, most of these women. But they don't pick well. They pick men who shouldn't be fathers to reproduce with, and then they put these boys in terrible situations where they grow up without men in their lives, and they run into all these mental health issues, prison issues, economic issues, cultural issues that plague them for decades, and plague these communities for decades. The college gender gap is happening not just in the U.S., but in a range of upper and middle income countries, including France, Slovenia, Mexico, and Brazil. In almost every rich country, women earn the majority of bachelor's degrees, Claudia Golden, a historian and economics professor at Harvard University, told me. As a general rule, almost every country that gives men and women equal access to education discovers within a few decades that women are doing better. The international nature of the gender gap invites biological explanations, which should be neither overstated nor categorically dismissed. Prominent psychologists, including Angela Duckworth, the author of Grit, have found that while girls and boys have similar IQ scores, girls get better grades thanks to their superior self-control and ability to delay gratification. But that just begs the question of where girls' superior self-control really comes from. Perhaps the fact that girls' brains mature faster than boys gives them an early advantage in elementary school, which shapes the culture of success throughout their education. Perhaps subtle hormonal differences, particularly in testosterone levels, affect how boys perceive the risk of ending their education. I think both of those things are true. It's not just the lack of fathers, the lack of male presence in these boys' lives. It's also the fundamental differences between the sexes and the way that we have evolved to be and the way that we learn. And how so much of the way our society is set up is disadvantageous to boys. It used to be very advantageous to boys. But as we've industrialized and modernized our society has come to be incredibly advantageous to girls. And we have done nothing for boys the way we did for girls when the society was the other way. When society was the other way, we invested God knows how much money in providing opportunity and education and mentorship and aid to young girls to help them get on their feet. But we're not doing that for boys, despite the fact that we're in a crisis. This ad is in the way. Historically, men have been more likely to drop out of school to work in hot economies, whether it's in the factories of World War II or the fracking mines of the Dakotas, Golden said. I don't know for sure if testosterone's effect on impulsiveness and risk is the key player here, but men's higher likelihood to drop out of college for perceived short-term gains in the labor force might tell us men are more likely to do risky things. Yes, men are more likely to do risky things. That's also part of being a man, taking calculated risks. That's also what makes us attractive to women. That's the way we evolved. It's part of our biology. Unfortunately, we don't live in a society where men are actually, young men and boys are, praised and aided and helped for taking risks. They are demonized and shunned and criticized and punished for being themselves. Neither Golden nor anybody else I spoke with suggested that biological drivers of the gender gap ruled out the importance of cultural or public policy. I don't think it does either. There's lots of things that we could do in the culture and at the level of public policy to help boys. Absolutely, lots of things that we could do. Will we do them? I doubt it. Because we just don't care about boys and men the way that we care about girls and women. We just don't as a society. That's also inherent to the sexes and the intersexual dynamics. Women get more love, men get more respect. With more love comes more empathy and support. With more respect comes more accountability and responsibility. So we don't get the help. We're not going to get the help, unfortunately. It is safer, I think, to say that some blend of variables, including economic, cultural, and biological factors, has created a scenario in which girls and women are more firmly attached to the education pipeline than men in the U.S. and across the developed world. Yes. The implications of the college gender gap for individual men are troubling, but uncertain. My biggest immediate worry is that men are making the wrong decision, Golden said. Of course, it's all men's fault. All men's fault. Absolutely. I worry they'll come to severely regret their choice if they realize the best jobs require a degree they never got. There is also the issue of dating. College grads typically marry college grads, but this trend of associative mating will hit some turbulence, at least among heterosexual people. If present trends continue, the dating pool of college grads could include 2 women for every guy. Yeah, that's pretty good for us college grads, I guess, those of us who have a college degree then. Not so good for a lot of other men. This is the dating market that women wanted, and this is the dating market that they've created. As women spend more time in school and their male peers dwindle as a share of the college population, further delays in marriage and childbirth may ensue. That would further reduce U.S. fertility rates, which worries some commentators, albeit not all. The most severe implications, I suspect, will be cultural and political. The U.S. electorate is already polarized by college and gender. Women and college graduates strongly favor Democrats, while men and people without college degrees lean Republican. Those divisions seem likely to worsen if the parties' attitudes towards each other calcify into gender stereotypes. My biggest worry is, that by the time policymakers realize that gender inequality in college is a problem, we'll have hit a point where college will seem deeply effeminate to some men in a way that will be hard to undo, Reeves said. That's why we need both parties to offer a positive vision of college and a positive vision of masculinity. Sing praises. If male identity is seen by some as being at odds with education, that's a problem for the whole country. Yes, hurt men hurt us, as Warren Farrell likes to say. Or I think he says hurt boys grow up and hurt us. The solutions to the college gender gap should be as broad as the causes. Specific policies to reduce childhood poverty could increase high school graduation rates. Recruitment drives to advertise teaching jobs to men might help too. Monetary and fiscal policies that maximize employment and minimize poverty are likely to help men who might otherwise respond to unemployment by withdrawing from their families and communities. This, in turn, could help boys and young men stay in school. How about incentivizing boys to do these things? Boys aren't going to do a lot of these things because there's no incentive to do them. Women don't date teachers. Women don't marry teachers. If a woman is a teacher, she's not going to marry another teacher. And one of the main reasons boys do anything is for girls. This is only going to get worse, unfortunately, in my personal opinion. All this stuff is only going to continue to get worse. Because there's no solution that I can see on the horizon that anybody's willing to do. And fundamentally, the solution that has to come is women have to change. That's the only way forward. Women have to actually change. And I don't see that happening. Because we love women, we empathize with women, we support women. We don't ask them to hold themselves accountable for their behavior and their choices. We hold men accountable for women's behavior and choices. The Wall Street Journal reports that some colleges are putting their finger on the scale for male applicants to avoid having their schools become 70% female. But it's a mistake to exclusively see the male-female gender gap as a college problem. If we wait until college to intervene, it's too late, says Thomas Mortensen, a senior scholar at the Pell Institute for the Study of Opportunity in Higher Education. I agree with that. The pivot point is in adolescence, yes. And the foundation is laid in the early grades. This gender gap is an economic story, a cultural story, a criminal justice story, and a family structure story that begins to unfold in elementary school. The attention-grabbing statistic that barely 40% of college grads are men seems to cry out for an immediate policy response. But rather than dial up male attendance one college admissions department at a time, policymakers should think about the social forces that make the statistic inevitable. That's the end of the article. Absolutely. This is going to continue to be a huge issue, a big problem. And I don't know that there's really going to be any solution. Hopefully a lot of men are out there getting into trades and vocational work because there's always going to be a demand for that kind of labor. And I think to a certain degree, a lot of men recognize that we're not welcome on college campuses. We're not welcome in a lot of spheres of public life now. And so a lot of men who haven't been given the support and the advocacy as children that they needed are dropping out of society, are focusing purely on themselves and themselves alone. And I think, you reap what you sow to a certain degree. Unfortunately, some of that may blow back on the rest of us, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, guys, if you like the video, please go ahead and hit the like button. Post any comments or questions that you have in the comment section below. If you'd like to send me any individual stories or articles that you find, please go ahead and email them to therevolutionarymail@gmail.com. My name is Alex. This has been The Revolutionary Mail. Thank you for watching. And turn off.